especially in light of the earlier email and server disruptions and subsequent catching up that probably is occurring for many people. So I'd like to introduce today's workshop speaker. Anna is a second-year master's student in the Digital Humanities program here at Loyola. She currently works as the Digital Systems Graduate Assistant and Reference Graduate Assistant at LUC Libraries. Her research focuses on digital humanities, archival accessibility, adaptation, the text encoding initiative, and book history. So I'll turn it over to Anna, and just to note that our next workshop will be held on March 3rd with Andrew French on building digital exhibits and Omeka, and this workshop will be recorded and posted on our center's YouTube page.
Hi, everyone. So as Dr. Hupwood said, I'm Anna, and I will be giving everyone a crash course in Creative Commons and open access. So let me share my presentation and move all the controls so I can see things. Blur, present. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation? Awesome. Great. So welcome. Crash course. Let's go. So first thing I kind of want to start off with, my slide will transition. There we go. A little disclaimer. So this is not going to be a comprehensive presentation on this topic, or either of these topics. This is intended to give kind of a broad introduction and to encourage critical discussion for the use of digital humanities and other types of projects. So this will be a very discussion-based workshop. So if you feel comfortable, I'd love it if you would unmute and speak during some of these discussions. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat to talk about some of these topics. I am not an expert in any of these. I will be compiling all of the resources that I used, as well as answering some of the questions and putting in some of the information that we've discussed in this presentation into a blog post for the Digital Humanities Graduate Student Association's blog. So there will be a lot more information there after this presentation, hopefully by like the end of the week, as kind of a digital handout of sorts to give you more information on this. And I also won't really be covering to a very big extent copyright or fair use. Those are really big topics that are related to these two topics here, but just huge breadth of things to cover. So we'll not be covering them here. So the first thing is our outline. What will we be discussing today? We'll start off defining some key terms, defining what open access is, what is the Creative Commons, what are some of the licenses, where can you find some of these works, some considerations for using licenses, and then we'll do a little bit of a case study discussion. So let me catch up my notes to my presentation. Ta-da! Key terms. So this is kind of a text-heavy page. I'll read all of it out. All of these definitions came from Merriam-Webster dictionary, just because many of them are legal terms. I wanted to be as precise as possible in a definition, and felt like using my own words might be a little too imprecise. So the first one is intellectual property, which is a property like an idea, invention, or process that derives from the work of the mind or intellect. So these are things that you, as a creator, create, anything from your fan fiction on a website to your big academic paper, and everything in between of all sorts of creative works. So copyright is the exclusive legal right to reproduce, publish, sell, or distribute the matter in any form, such as literary, musical, or artistic works. So your intellectual property has some copyright with it. There are a lot of different forms of copyright. All intellectual property has kind of this, in the US specifically, I don't really know a lot about copyright law globally, but does have a form of copyright on it as it is created and presented outward. And there are more formal ways of claiming this copyright and formal ways of kind of enhancing it. And there's also some ways of kind of relaxing the rights you hold on on your works, which is what we'll be discussing here. So the public domain, which is kind of a separate thing from anything like open access or Creative Commons, is the realm embracing property rights that belong to the community at large, are unprotected by copyright or patent, and are subject to appropriation by anyone. So public domain is a big topic and kind of a contentious one, because there's been a lot of lobbying by companies to kind of freeze public domain. Actually, the new works were not coming into the public domain until January of 2019. So it was 20 years from 98 when that kind of freezing of public domain happened. So that was the first year we got some new public domain works. And as of right now, works are released into the public domain 95 years after they first entered the public, either through publishing or through whatever means, until 2073. After 2073, works by creators who died 7 decades earlier will expire each year. So if an author passed away in 2003, their work would be available in 2073. So that's a little bit more in comparable to some of the other copyright laws in other countries. The US is kind of a very tangled web of copyright and public domain right now. So fair use is a legal doctrine that portions of copyright materials may be used without permission of the copyright owner, provided the use is fair and reasonable, which are interesting definitions. Does not sustainably impair the value of the materials and does not curtail the profits reasonably expected by the owner. So fair use is another big discussion, especially in the academic realm, to be able to use chapters from books in course packs, or to be able to use a work for commentary, things like that. Another very big topic that comes into play in some of these discussions, but not something I'll be covering more in depth than this. And then open source is something that often gets kind of confused with open access, but open source is specifically for software. So it's of software having the source code freely available for possible modification, redistribution. So if anyone has seen things like, oh goodness, I'm blanking on the name, GitHub, yes. If you've ever been on GitHub, that's one of the places, repositories, where oftentimes people will just deposit their open source code for you to kind of grab and use in your own ways. So that being said, we'll talk a little bit, maybe my slide will switch. Maybe not. There it is, open access. So what is open access? Open access is a term for information freely available to any member of the internet accessing public with limited barriers such as paywalls or copyrights. So this is a term that originated in academic publishing. It's kind of a movement towards making information more accessible, to democratize this creation of information and push forward development of ideas and research. It's a very large topic that I am not as well versed in as I initially thought doing some research into this. I'm not super well versed in some of the pros and cons. I know there's a lot of myths around if you publish something open access, it is not to the same level of academic rigor as something that perhaps isn't open access, which is not true. Publishing open access just makes things more available to more people, rather than removing some of those traditional academic rigor methodologies like peer review and things like that. But to learn more and more in depth on this topic, I would definitely recommend reaching out to a subject specialist librarian or checking out the library's open access research guide, which will be linked in the resources blog post. And if you guys if anyone will still be here in the fall or is interested, Open Access Week is a kind of global initiative that the libraries usually host a few different events for, and it's usually in October. So a little bit more that I can speak to open access. There are multiple pathways for making articles and other scholarly works open access. They often depend on individual journals or publishers' policies. There's different things you may have heard, like gold open access, green open access, paid open access. A lot of times with some of the major publishing houses, Elsevier, Springer, etc., you will need to pay the publisher to make your information, like to make your articles open access, as like a version of record, the actual version that comes in the journal to make that open access. There are other options depending upon where it gets posted and the way it gets posted. So oftentimes manuscripts and things like that can be posted to institutional repositories, or perhaps your own personal webpage, although that requires some attribution and things like that. But one of the ways, especially smaller journals, will make their information open access is by using a Creative Commons license. So what is Creative Commons? So Creative Commons is actually an international nonprofit organization focused on the challenges of reusing copyrighted content. The organization was created in 2001 by a Stanford law professor named Larry Lessig, as well as a few other collaborators who wanted to help creators license their copyrighted materials for others to use and reuse. Sometimes Creative Commons is accused of being anti-copyright, which they will say that they are absolutely not anti-copyright because they just want to make this more accessible to you, sort of thing. I actually will maybe, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Ta-da! Let's look at the website itself. So this is the Creative Commons website. This is where you will get the most up-to-date information on the Creative Commons licensing. They try to make it as simple as possible to utilize, which sometimes makes it seem a little bit less transparent. I did have to do a lot of looking around through FAQs and things like that to find some of this information, to get some of the background other than the very simple license selector and things like that. But this is definitely a place that you will want to start when considering using a Creative Commons license, because this is where the licenses themselves reside. So what are the licenses? So Creative Commons as an organization has kind of become synonymous with the licenses they provide. The organization does do other things, especially things like legal consulting when it comes to copyright. But the licenses are kind of the primary thing that everyone thinks about when they hear CC or Creative Commons. So there have been 5 different versions of the license since the organization was started in 2001. There was a version 2.5. So the most up-to-date version is version 4. And that is the most current, although you will see all versions potentially still in use, depending upon if the organization has updated things or is more recent. Most commonly, though, it's 4 and 3, because those are the 2 most recent versions. I can't speak to all of the differences in the legal code of the licenses between those 2, but one of the major things that has been noted is that version 4 has been adjusted to be a more focused on international copyright, more usable by an international audience, whereas the previous 4 licenses were very much focused on US copyright and would often have to be ported and unported to make them properly accessible in those global contexts. So one of the main things about these licenses is that all the licenses require attribution, and then there are 6 types of licenses within each version, which have these kind of main conditions on them that you can pick and choose from. One thing to note is that you as the creator, or whomever would typically get the copyright as a creator, so if you're working for a company, nonprofit, things like that, will keep the copyright to the work. These licenses are meant to facilitate the sharing of the work and to make it a little bit more simple, something we'll talk about a little bit more later. And these are legal documents. I have this in all caps in my notes. So please read the full license before deciding to use or not use any of these for your project. projects. This is a very surface level explanation of different licenses, and does not encompass all of the rights that you will be keeping or waiving when you use a Creative Commons license. So these are the 4 main license conditions. You may have seen these little abbreviations or the little images on the bottom of journals, projects, things like that. So this is what all of them mean. So every Creative Commons license usually starts with BY, because all Creative Commons licenses have to have attribution. So credit must be given to the original creator. There's also non-commercial. Only non-commercial reuse is permitted. You cannot take someone's Creative Commons license content, use it in something else, and then sell that other thing. No derivatives. So this will sometimes be put on, especially like academic articles, when they do not want you to actually be reusing the content to make something new. It is just so that you can share the content and access the content. Sometimes some artistic works will also use this condition on the license. And then there's share alike. So any adaptations or new projects made with this information must be under the same conditions as the original license. And this is something we'll also talk about a little bit more later, because it's a very interesting condition to put on your work. So I've been talking a lot. So let's do a little activity. So take about 15 minutes. I'll check back and make sure, see if anyone needs a little bit longer. And look to see if you can find a project in your discipline that uses a Creative Commons license, digital humanities project, anything like that, or perhaps some other project, journal, etc. Or one that you would have expected to use a Creative Commons license that does not. Perhaps it uses a different license, or it does not actually license its content freely as you might have expected. So feel free to turn off your video, take a few minutes to look, and I'll check back in about 15 to see how everyone's doing. How's everybody doing? I guess a little, yeah, physical thumbs up or digital thumbs up if you're all set. I think, yeah. Great. So I'm actually going to stop sharing for a second because I've just got a couple questions to ask you about how that went. So how was it? How difficult was it for you to find projects with Creative Commons licenses? Maybe starting with a poll. How many of you found a project that was under a Creative Commons license? Okay. And then how many of you found a project you were expecting to have a Creative Commons license that didn't? Okay, a couple of you too. Cool. So yeah, does anyone want to talk about how that was, what you kind of the strategies that you used, how you found the experience of looking for these types of projects? Yeah, Regina?
Yeah, so I looked at two digital humanities journals, the Digital Humanities Quarterly, and I think the debates in the Digital Humanities series. So I was actually expecting both of them to be under Creative Commons licenses, since all the articles are widely available on the web. But only one of them actually has Creative Commons license. So only Digital Humanities Quarterly has that. The Debates in Digital Humanities doesn't have that. So the copyright is owned by the Regents of the University of Minnesota. So that was quite surprising to me.
Yeah. Did anyone else find any that were surprising? Were there any particular places you were looking, or was it kind of just like I know about this project, let me check its license? How did you feel like that experience went? Yeah, Prakriti?
I was kind of curious about these free image sites and what kind of licenses they have. And apparently each has their own license with like very similar wording. A lot of it is Creative Commons, like it overlaps with Creative Commons would be, but it's not that license. It was just interesting because, you know, you can reuse and reshare anything. So it was like, that's where I went with images. And yeah, they don't have Creative Commons, I guess. It's a very specific kind. I just assumed anything with like free to share had that. But no, everyone has a very specific license.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the really interesting things with image sharing websites. My next slide has some of those things on it, where a lot of them do write their own licenses for free use, especially because they don't want you to be taking, often like stock image websites, Unsplash, Pixabay, things like that. They don't want you to take their like beautiful picture of mountains that someone else uploaded and you'd upload that to your own stock image website and maybe make a profit off it or something like that. They want you to be using it to significantly remix it or reuse it with that attribution. There's a few comments here about people who found some interesting things. The Torn Apart Sobrados, looking through museum catalogs and archives as well to try and find some of these interesting things.
I was looking at the Smithsonian Collections portal online, and they have a metadata field or a field in the metadata for individual objects that lists using the icons which Creative Commons license it's permitted for use under.
Awesome. I see a comment here in the chat from Catherine about what it means by non-commercial versus commercial. It was something we touched upon a little bit when we went over some of the main conditions of the licenses. But I mean, basically non-commercial versus commercial is if there is that condition of it has to be non-commercial reuse, you cannot sell or make money off of the item you have created or the item you're distributing through reuse. So I can't take Baby Shark and make a remix and then try and sell it for a profit if Baby Shark has been given a non-commercial Creative Commons license, versus something that doesn't have that attribution on it. So say it's just like a just 4.0 BY, so just attribution. I could make that Baby Shark remix as long as I said that this is Baby Shark and this is who it was by. In my remix, I could sell it on iTunes or I could sell it on wherever. And then Catherine continues with that question about scholarly publishers. So this is something I'll touch on in a little bit later, but that's, yes. I'll discuss that a little later. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, I have a question. I think because you talked about the different versions and it's on like 4.0 right now. I found one, Digital Thoreau had the homepage image under one of the licenses, but it was on the 2.0, and it like at the like, so I was reading through it and it's like, oh, there's a new version of the license available, and it doesn't automatically put it under the new one. But like, I don't really notice any difference between the 4.0 and the 2.0 aside from the 2.0 is generic and the 4.0 is international. Is that just like the 2.0 doesn't expand to international like usage, or like that was just like because the text is exactly the same talking about it.
So I didn't do a terribly deep dive into what the exact updates were for each version. The major thing I do know is that 1, 2, 2.5, and 3 are focused on US copyright law. So there are certain aspects of that do not translate well to international copyright law that they have in the 4.0 version, which is why oftentimes they will be preceded by like generic, which is the US version, or unported, which means that the license has been, I don't want to define this incorrectly for you, but I can't quite remember what the definition of it is. But it's they are saying that it is not. I don't want to give you the incorrect information, so I'm going to write this down and I will make sure to answer that in the blog post.
It sounds like maybe like unported would be like it doesn't transfer over to the updates.
Well, unportedness is about transferring it to that global rights. I just don't remember the exact way that it is done, so I don't want to give you misinformation on that. But to your question about updating the licenses, this is another sticky thing that was a little bit confusing for me, and one of the reasons why I was kind of mentioning that the Creative Commons website is simple but not super transparent, because it took quite a few clicks to get down to the Creative Commons wiki article and all the different versions that it kind of tries to explain what they all are and what the differences are. And as I understand it, so Creative Commons licenses are irrevocable. You cannot remove a Creative Commons license once you put it on. And that's another thing we'll mention later. Thank you, Liz. Liz put some information on ported licenses in the chat for everyone. Appreciate that. Really big topic, and it's a lot of legal stuff, so I don't want to mess this up when I describe it to you. But oh gosh, lost my train of thought. So as far as I understand, because the licenses are irrevocable, I'm not sure how updating the licenses works because of the fact that there are small changes made with every version. That was something that was a little, for me, trying to find those answers was a little bit difficult on the Creative Commons website, and was something I wanted to double check in the information that I was going to give later on, just to make sure that because I know I said earlier about like there's all the different versions floating around in the web and some haven't been updated. I'm not 100% sure what the way in updating the license is. Did that answer your question? Okay. So does anyone else have anything they want to mention about finding these? Yeah, Liz.
Yeah, so I looked at, I already closed the site, What America Ate, which is a great kind of compendium of food history from the Great Depression. And I just scrolled down to the bottom of the landing page, and it looks like they have 4 of the logos, like one with the CC, Creative Commons, one with a person, one with a $, no, non-commercial, and one that's like an arrow that goes counterclockwise. And I guess that they all kind of link to the Creative Commons website. But it was interesting because I at first glance, I feel like a reader might be like, what is the difference between all of these? Why not just like the one? What is it? Is it expected that people will already be familiar with what those little symbols mean? Or will kind of follow through with the website? Like, how does Creative Commons kind of like get the word out so that these are easily recognizable symbols that we know immediately what they mean?
Yeah, that's one of the kind of weird, frustrating things about utilizing these, is that there are some inconsistencies in the way that they'll be put on the bottom of pages to say that they've got it. Because sometimes you'll get people who will use the little abbreviation. So you'll have like a BYNCSA 4.0. You're just like, what? And sometimes you'll get those little icons that do mean the same thing, but they're little icons. And some of them, yeah, the little like $ with a slash through it, you could probably guess is non-commercial, but the swirly arrow you may not necessarily guess is share like.
Yeah, I was like, what does that mean again? And then I followed through.
Usually those are buttons. That's one of kind of like the sleekness of Creative Commons things, is that typically when a Creative Commons license is put at the bottom of something, either in image form or in word form, it is typically a hyperlink or a button that will take you back to the Creative Commons website with the actual license and with the explanation, the simple explanation, and the link to the real explanation of it. And it's interesting because you can put it there and you can be like, this means something. And then, okay, I guess I'll go check it out. And I don't know if I really have an answer to like how Creative Commons got their like information out there about what all these symbols mean. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, I gotta look this up, or maybe I'll click on it and something will happen. But that's also something worth discussing more and worth looking into. I am going to switch back to the presentation real quick, because there's 2 more slides before we'll have a more in-depth discussion of some of the things that you guys found, some of the different projects and the licenses that they use. So I apologize for the train if you could hear that. All right, let me share my presentation once again. Great. So maybe, yeah, as promised in the workshop description, here is a non-exhaustive list of some different repositories to find some open access and Creative Commons works. So there are a couple of like asterisks here and little daggers. As Prakriti mentioned when she was talking about looking at some of these image places, a lot of these image sharing, free stock image type websites, even websites where like there are certain images you can pay for and then there are certain images that are free, will typically use their own license. It's similar, as Prakriti noted, to a Creative Commons license in what it permits, but it is not exactly the same, especially because there is some discussion of whether or not Creative Commons license are overly permissible and that they have the creator giving away too many rights to their content. And then there are a couple of these where the content is actually in the public domain. For the National Park Service B-roll, you actually have to go to the National Park Service website, look up the specific park you want, and put in B-roll. The archive site doesn't seem to exist anymore that housed all of it together. You have to go to like each individual park's page, but there's lots of beautiful video and photographs from different national parks. So to add to this list, does anyone have any suggestions, any places that they look? like anything that you feel like ought to be added to this, perhaps a caveat you like to add to any of these. I will write them all down and update it. But does anyone have anything they want to add, perhaps putting it in the chat or just unmuting themselves? And gosh, never done so much in presentation mode. Open culture. I assume that's a probably text-based or multimodal open.
It's
open.
not. It's yeah. I'll put the link.
Thank you. Yeah, archive.org. So a couple of these on here, the Perlinger archives, the moving image archive, I think those are the only ones that I put on there, are actually archives within archive.org. No, they're within the internet. What? They're archives within archives. Some of those bigger archival websites, some things are open, are either under Creative Commons licenses, other more permissible licenses, or public domain. Some of the content is still under copyright. Sometimes there are issues of perhaps the item itself is either no longer in copyright or what have you, but the particular scan or particular copy is coming from like a university library or something like that. So like that scan is still copyrighted and would need permissions or would need us to have its own Creative Commons license, which is interesting. So feel free to continue to put things in the chat. Ooh, YouTube. That's a great segue to my next slide. Maybe. Okay, so there are a few different things to consider, and YouTube is one of my examples. So with that last bullet point there, types of licenses allowed on platforms. So some platforms have restrictions on the types of Creative Commons licenses you can use, and YouTube is one of them. So if you want to put Creative Commons licensed videos onto YouTube, you only have one option. It is the 3.0 attribution only unported license. That's your option, that's it. You cannot actually put any further restrictions on the use of your Creative Commons video that is put up on YouTube. You as the creator do have the option to choose if it's going to be a keeping the copyright monetizable type video or if it is going to be a Creative Commons licensed video, but you only have that one choice, which is very interesting. That was the one like major example that I saw throughout a lot of the articles discussing some of these things to consider. But there are some other platforms that like allow you to share content, but want to restrict the types of content you can share. So a couple of these other things to consider. Creative Commons licenses cannot be revoked. So this is necessary for them to have their intended purpose. Say I post my photograph of my dog under a 4.0 attribution license, but then I decide like, actually, I don't want people using my dog. I don't like this. If that were something I was allowed to do, then say someone else like Regina had taken my cute little dog photo and put it in a collage with other dog photos. Now there could be some, and she used that photo when it was originally under that Creative Commons license. If I was able to revoke that Creative Commons license, now I could like try and get her for copyright because now my material is copyrighted once again. So wow, so it does, that is the reason why it is irrevocable. You don't want to have those sorts of situations happening, but it is definitely something to consider when you are selecting a type of permissible license for your content, your creations, because say you do have down the line something going on, perhaps you made a project or a website open access at one point, and now you're writing a book and you want to get your book published. That might end up down the line having some issues. This is not to say that you shouldn't use these licenses, but it is definitely something to consider. One of the big things to consider is that multiple Creative Commons licenses can conflict. So this is the thing that I was kind of mentioning earlier with share alike is kind of often the culprit of this. So in some of perhaps your bigger digital humanities projects where you might be drawing from different sources from different places that perhaps have different Creative Commons licenses, there could be an issue with you finding a Creative Commons license that satisfies all of the requirements of the materials that you are pulling in. So the example I wrote down here has to do with Baby Shark. So for example, if I'm making a remix of Baby Shark and the Jaws theme, where Baby Shark is licensed under like a share alike / attributions license, and Jaws has also just an attributions license, no share alike. For me to share my remix under a share alike and attributions license would work for both of them because my license matches Baby Shark's, which is the less open version of that license. However, if now that Jaws Themes is licensed under a non-commercial share alike license, there is no license condition that would satisfy both of those requirements because Baby Shark requires whatever I am remixing to have a license exactly like Baby Shark. Same with Jaws, and because one has non-commercial and one does not, they will never be able to be shared together. And sometimes the commercial non-commercial can also cause issues with how permissible things are, but share alike tends to be kind of the culprit with finding a license that doesn't conflict with other previous licenses. So that is definitely something to look out for if you are going to be pulling in content from other sources that have licensed their content through a Creative Commons license, to make sure that whatever license you end up being able to use on your project fits kind of all these requirements for all these other projects. I tried to find a Baby Shark Jaws remix because I've heard it before and it's fabulous, but I couldn't find it. Sorry, no tunes. And then one of the other things to also consider is that Creative Commons licenses aren't super well regulated. While Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that provides these licenses and also provides some legal assistance and things like that, they aren't really regulators of how they are used. They're not checking in necessarily on every single person using a Creative Commons license. So it is worthwhile to double check some of the content that you are using if it is licensed under Creative Commons license, especially if you're using like a remix of somebody else's creation, to make sure that all of those attributions are in order, because sometimes there are some unscrupulous people who will perhaps incorrectly or intentionally incorrectly use licenses. Obviously, this is not something that you can totally avoid or totally try to not have come up in your project, but like a good faith effort is probably something worth doing, just to make sure that all the content you are using is good. Just kind of this is one of the things in some of the articles and research that's kind of given as like there was one bad case that happened, now everyone has to be on guard. Yeah. Does anyone have anything from their experience working with Creative Commons licenses, from things that they've heard, from research that they've done for their own projects that they might like to add to this things to consider list? Is there any considerations that you've had to go through to make sure that the license you were using is the perfect license, or perhaps maybe you chose not to use a license? It's okay if no one has anything to add to the list as well. These are just a few things to kind of start off with. Ooh, everyone moved. Okay, so let's look at some of the things that you found. So everyone kind of found different things that were licensed under Creative Commons, or perhaps they thought might have been but weren't. So I thought perhaps we could go through a few of those if anyone feels like sharing their thoughts on it, to look at what license they're using, what you perhaps could do with this content later on, especially if it is something like an archive, going through kind of their thought process. Why might they have selected a license or chose not to use a Creative Commons license? And then maybe thinking through, are there any potential issues this project could encounter? So does anyone have a project they'd like to start with? We can also start with one of the things that I found. It's not particularly academic, but it's kind of fun. But is there anyone who's really... We can also start with mine. So one of the fun things that not a creative or not a academic project really in any way, but I found very interesting that this was licensed under Creative Commons license, is Cards Against Humanity. Cards Against Humanity is licensed under a... Where'd it go? I have multiple screens here to try and make this easier. Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 4 license. So you can create your own version of Cards Against Humanity using some of their materials. They do actually provide you with some PDFs for making new Cards Against Humanity cards, provided that you are not doing it for profit. You are making it available to people for free. You are attributing your works to your remix to Cards Against Humanity, and you are sharing it with that same 4.0 attribution share alike non-commercial license. So yeah, what could you do with this? Has anyone made their own like Cards Against Humanity deck or anything? No. I know one of the things that I believe got made with this is the online version of Cards Against Humanity. As far as I understand, it was not actually made by Cards Against Humanity, the like card game organization, made by other people utilizing some of their stuff, which was very interesting. So Cards Against Humanity is like, they do sell their own cards. Does anyone have any thoughts about why they might have chosen to allow others to mix and remix on their content? Yeah, Andrew.
I feel like that's just the nature of the game itself. I know they'll have like within like the deck, I think they have like cards that you can like write on yourself. So I feel like that'd be good, like a sort of like a marketing tactic for them to be like, hey, like you can create like way more of these if you want, rather than like the few we provided. I think that just adds to like the fun and like, I don't know, keeping it fresh for people if they have their own ideas. But I also understand why they wouldn't want you to profit off that, because even though I guess they're kind of like apples to apples as well. So I don't know, like it's just kind of funny how like they're like, you can't profit off this, but we profited off of someone else's ideas. But I would just say, yeah, it just seems like it'd be like a way for them to expand like the interests amongst people if they don't like the cards or they want to change something.
I'm also curious, like, it's a big world. How many people have misused that to create their own like regional, local versions of it? Because not all countries have like stringent plagiarism laws, anti-plagiarism. I don't know the word, but you know what I mean. Because how are they going to track, right? I've definitely seen like at least 2 other versions of it, and I'm not sure how licensed that was. So it's just a thought.
Yeah, definitely. Why is this? Sorry, I'm trying to move you so I can control things. So any potential issues, conflicts? Prakriti brought up a good point with the maybe internationally people aren't following this as much. Yeah. So does anyone have perhaps one of the projects that they found that they'd like to share? Yeah, Kruti?
No, I was just thinking to that question as to why, because I feel like games have been plagiarized for a while. I grew up in India with a lot of versions of Uno and Monopoly and things like that. I'm just thinking it might be good for them as branding, right? Like if you're going to plagiarize it, might as well just use our branding and, you know, sort of further our own agenda a little bit as well. I think Andrew also alluded to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a way to get more exposure because perhaps someone who hadn't heard of it played a version of the game that somebody else made with this Creative Commons license, and now, oh, what's this? This is cool. Let me look it up. What? It's way bigger than this. I could buy cards. Definitely. So I noticed that a little earlier in the chat, Catherine mentioned something about UBC's Museum of Anthropology's online catalog, and that the Creative Commons icon is so small that it's almost unreadable. That's interesting. Anyone have any thoughts on perhaps, like, because they did choose to use a Creative Commons license, but why make the license so eensy teensy? Let's take a look.
Does Creative Commons, do they have guidelines or requirements for how their actual logos should appear? I mean, I guess they don't.
So they do give. Sorry, I am not used to any of these controls. They do give on their, nope, it's on the licenses. They do give an embed code for that little icon. It's here, and then sure, why not the 4.0? Down here, where is it? What the heck? Usually there's an embed code. And I swear it was here yesterday when I was looking at this. So it gives you the actual HTML links to put onto your website to have that little button, but they don't, as far as I understand, give standards for how, other than giving that embed code for how it should be used. I do know one thing that I found very interesting in the course of researching this is that the Creative Commons logo is not under Creative Commons license. It is fully under the copyright of the organization. So I am calling it fair use to use it in this presentation because this is commentary on how Creative Commons works. But it's not actually something that you can just use willy-nilly. So I would think that they've probably got some more restrictions, but I did not look too far into it beyond the, oh, they've got an embed code, that's cool, for how they expect people to use it on their website. Yeah. This, so you don't see my everything. Yeah, so, I mean, does anyone else have any thoughts on the use of this particular license on this particular website, how tiny it is? Oh gosh, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, Andrew.
This your Cards Against Humanity example got me thinking about. I don't know if any of you who used Tabletop Simulator. Anyone familiar? It's a game that you can buy off like the Steam store, and it's where people can create. It's simulating like a tabletop where like you play like card games or like board games, and people can like upload essentially like Uno or Sorry or like Cards Against Humanity. And I was looking, I'm like, wait, if people are like uploading these games that may be under Creative Commons licensing, like how are they? They're probably not adhering to like the licenses themselves. So I was just like, I was looking into it, and like it seems like, I don't know, it's just a weird question, or like because I feel like some of it's probably not a lot of people are probably just uploading games that are not wanting them to do that because they're just like, they'd want to make profit off people buying the game rather than on the tabletop simulator. So that is an interesting question about that, or observation, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely goes back to one of the considerations I kind of mentioned before with the not crazy well regulated. So sometimes this does happen. I mean, you can, with Creative Commons licenses, you can remix and reuse certain things for profit if it doesn't have the non-commercial on there. So perhaps that's some of what's going on there, but I've never used it, so I can't really speak to too much of it. Yeah. So I guess if anyone else has something they'd like to discuss, like to think about, I have a few others, but we also could just move on to if anyone has any other questions, I can endeavor to answer them. If I don't have an answer right now, I can definitely look them up and give you a little more research on it. But yeah, Regina.
I have a question about scholarly publishing. So assuming if a scholar releases their work under Creative Commons, and then later they want to publish a book and they want to use some material from that original article that was published under Creative Commons, can they revoke their own license and then use it for a book? They can't?
So yeah, so you can't revoke the license. So say you wrote an article or blog post or whatever that you said was, say you made it 4.0 BY. So the least restrictive of the 4.0 versions of the license. So in that circumstance, you could not revoke that license on that particular content, but because you have licensed it in that way, you could reuse some of your own content in a book that gets published, that gets sold. If it had the non-commercial attribution, that would be a lot stickier, but that is definitely something that you would have to, particularly in publishing, you would have to talk to your publisher about and what their standards on some of that is as well, because that is a bit of the kind of hairy, scary edge of utilizing Creative Commons on some of your content and then later on wanting to use some of those ideas in other places. But I would say depends on the type of license that you were using, could be possible. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions, any other comments, anything else they'd like to discuss? Otherwise, I know we're verging the end of this time and a few people had to skedaddle for other things, but are scholarly publishers commercial? Yes. Yes, asterisk, I guess. My understanding is yes, scholarly publishers are commercial publishing endeavors. If you were to publish your article through something, say like Elsevier, they are making a profit off of the use of this content that you've written or being paid to write this, or well, in some circumstances you are paying. It really depends on the publisher and how they run in their policies. I don't want to give you like a yes, definitely commercial answer because I'm not 100% certain because there is so much that can be different dependent upon the publisher, the type of thing you're publishing, the expectations of even that particular journal underneath a big, gigantic publisher. I would say for the best answer, check with your subject specialist librarian or some of the other specialists in copyright, like Margaret Heller and Niev McGuigan at the library. Does anyone else? Yeah, Regina.
Sorry, I have another question. So I was looking at some digital humanities projects and they use images that are copyrighted elsewhere, but they are creating an archive or database for it. So I guess their metadata, they're processing everything, is their work, but the images is copyrighted somewhere else. In that case, could the project license their archive under a Creative Commons license, even though the image copyright doesn't belong to them?
That would depend upon the permissions that you were getting from the other copyright holders. If you know from the beginning that the archive you're intending to work on, that you'd like to have it published under Creative Commons license, that is definitely one of the things you should mention when you are contacting the copyright holders to get permission to use their materials, to make sure that that is something that they can give permission for. Sometimes copyright holders, publishers will allow that. They just don't want to allow it for everyone. So if you contact them specifically and say, like, this is my academic project, this is my archive that's building X, Y, and Z, I'd like to license it under this license. I'd like to use your materials. Here's how I'm going to use them. And like, here's how you would be attributed or what have you. That's probably the best way to go about it. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think there's going to be a definitive answer on that. It will be a very case by case, who the copyright holders are and what they want. Because like I said before, putting it under a Creative Commons license does not mean that you no longer hold the copyright to the materials. However, it does mean that other people can reuse them. So perhaps the original copyright holder of that image won't want that to happen, or maybe won't want it to happen with this particular version. So that's kind of the course of action that I would recommend. I'm gonna stop sharing this. So if no one has any other questions, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate you going on this crash course of open information with me. As I said, I will have that blog post out with all of the resources I used, some of the resources you guys recommended that I'm going to need to copy from the chat, and just perhaps getting some more fully formed answers to some of the questions that everyone asked on there. So thank you so much.